Hello, my name is Alyssa Adams, and today you will be hearing myself, Lauren Zaleski, Miranda Meadows, and Lauren Skulina talk to you about the effect of a weighted blanket on psychological and physiological measures of stress and anxiety. So, if any of you have seen these weighted blankets while shopping in stores or online, you may notice that they're targeted towards people who have high stress levels or high anxiety. This includes people who have autism, anxiety disorders, or just general difficulty sleeping. While research done in both 1998 and 1992 suggests that users do in fact report feelings of relaxation, a study done by Chen and others in 2012 suggested that we have very little evidence to suggest why this is happening. This is what sparked our research idea. While there wasn't a whole lot of research on these weighted blankets, we did come across some interesting findings. Studies done by Edelson and Grandin suggested that individuals who reported the greatest relaxation effect had the highest initial arousal ratings. Research done by Reynolds in 2015 and Chen in 2012 suggested that these blankets were the most useful in decreasing stress after specific stress-triggering events. Both these findings have implications for the market these blankets are being targeted towards and can better help certain populations make decisions when buying and using these blankets. Another use for weighted blankets outside of the home is in medical or psychiatric facilities. In 2008, a study done by Mullen suggested that these blankets are good alternatives to more invasive restraints. And in 1987, research done by Krauss suggested that there was no adverse effects to using the blankets. If weighted blankets are a viable alternative to harsh restraints, producers may have an entire new population to sell to, and medical professionals may have a more humane way to treat patients. So prior to starting our research, my team hypothesized that exposure to the weighted blanket would lead to reduced scores on perceived anxiety and decreased stress as measured by electrodermal activity and heart rate variability.
Our participants for the study were 25 students enrolled at the University of Mount Union. 17 of the participants were female, while 8 of them were male. The majority of the participants were white, and the average age of the participant was about 19. 13 of the participants were exposed to the weighted blanket condition first, while 12 were exposed to the sheet first. Our materials included an informed consent and debriefing form, the Burns Anxiety Scale, BioPack software system to measure EDA, a fingertip heart rate variability monitor, a large recliner chair for the participant to sit in, and the weighted blanket and a sheet. We used a two-way repeated measures design with the weighted blanket and no weighted blanket as our independent variables, and our measures of EDA, HRV, and perceived anxiety as our dependent variables. The student signed up to participate through the SONA system. Once the procedure began, the participant read and signed the informed consent form. Then they completed the Burns Anxiety Scale questionnaire, and baseline measures of EDA and HRV were taken. EDA and HRV data was collected during each treatment period, with 13 participants starting with the weighted blanket first and 12 starting without. The Burns Anxiety Scale questionnaire was completed in between treatments and after the final treatment. At the end of the procedure, the participants were given a debriefing statement explaining the purpose of the study.
After the conclusion of the study, the data was collected. This table shows the number of participants, mean, and standard deviation for each condition. There was some researcher error when recording EDA that caused us to have to disregard data from 3 participants in that condition, hence the lower N. In the presence of the blanket, EDA showed a statistically significant increase, HRV showed a non-significant increase, and BAI showed a significant decrease. This is a breakdown of how we interpreted our data. We used a two-way repeated measures ANOVA to allow participants to act as their own control. This allowed us to expose the participant to both the blanket and the sheet in a randomized order. Participants with an even number were exposed to the blanket first and then the sheet, while participants with an odd number were exposed in the opposite order. This test allowed us to tease out if there were any interaction effects associated with the order in which the participant was exposed to the blanket. Fortunately, there were none, which allowed us to analyze the between subjects effects very easily. The between subject effects gave information about how the participants responded for each treatment. There were significant main effects for EDA and BAI, but no significant main effect for HRV. The meaning of these effects will be explained more in the results and discussion section.
For the results of our study, we did an analysis of the participants' heart rate variability, electrodermal activity, as well as their perceived anxiety when they were exposed to a weighted blanket and when they were not exposed to a weighted blanket. For the participants, when they were exposed to a weighted blanket, we found that they experienced a slight increase in heart rate variability as well as a significant increase in their electrodermal activity. With the weighted blanket, we found the participants had a significant decrease in their perceived anxiety. When the participants were without the weighted blanket, which would be when they were having their baseline measure or they were underneath the sheet, we found the participants' heart rate variability remained relatively constant and their electrodermal activity significantly decreased. Then without the weighted blanket, we found the participants had a significant increase in perceived anxiety. Overall, our research yielded interesting results. Our participants reported lower levels of perceived anxiety and stress when exposed to a weighted blanket. This is consistent with Edelson, Goldberg Edelson, Kurt, and Grandin's study in 1998. However, this could be indicative of a placebo effect in that an individual may feel better under a weighted blanket without actually experiencing significant physiological effects. From the results, decreased stress as indicated by electrodermal activity was not found. Instead, when participants were exposed to a weighted blanket, their levels of electrodermal activity increased. This was inconsistent with Reynolds, Lane, and Mullen's research in 2015. This is explained by an overheating while under the weighted blanket, and that would be as a heat effect rather than a stress effect. From the results, a decrease in the participants' stress as indicated by an increase in heart rate variability was not found. We did have a trend in that it was a predicted direction of heart rate variability, but the trend was not strong enough for us to consider that physiological effect to be significant. This then was inconsistent with Reynolds, Lane, and Mullen's research in 2015. After we completed our research, we examined a number of limitations that we were presented with during the process. Our participants that we had in our study came from a small sample of individuals from our university's population. We did not pool participants from outside of our university, so our overall population was a little less diverse. The study itself was conducted in a laboratory environment rather than in a private environment, so some participants who were being exposed to a weighted blanket for the first time was being done so in an environment that may not have been comfortable. When we recorded our physiological data, we realized that this could be anxiety provoking to some of the participants as they were being hooked up to unfamiliar machines and experiencing something that they may never have been exposed to before. During the data collection aspect of our research, we had research error in that some of the machines we used were not correct at the time. Therefore, we collected more data for electrodermal activity than we did heart rate variability, which kind of threw off some of our results in the end during the data analysis aspect of it. The weighted blanket that we used was not accustomed to participant size. In other research that was done before ours, they chose to use a weighted blanket that is adjustable based on the participant size. However, what we had available was the same weighted blanket to use for every participant. Finally, we found a limitation is that when we conducted our research, it was done so during flu season, so some of our participants may have been a little ill, and we found that the physiological data of the ill participants can kind of skew the data that we were looking for in order to find a significant result. Based on the limitations that we found during our research, we as researchers say that it is important to conduct further research in order to come up with more significant conclusions and add to the overall topic of weighted blanket and anxiety. We thank you so much for taking time out of your day to listen to our senior research that we conducted here at the University of Mount Union. If you have any questions, please feel free to ask.